First of all, thanks for watching this video. Second, here is the finished project that I'm going to be working on across this video and one more. These are two custom built-in cabinets that are flanking a fireplace. One thing to note is that the walls have a the foundation is bumped out from the wall a bit. You can kind of see that in the left cabinet there. And the tops of these cabinets, the client wanted them flush with that, so to add a little bit of extra fun in terms of fitting these. You can see the fronts of them have a nice little diagonal pattern, if you will. The right cabinet measures about 51 inches wide and 18 inches deep by almost 40 inches tall. The cabinet on the left is narrower, about 37 inches wide. Made everything out of maple veneered plywood, and then the doors are made from poplar and MDF, and the trim pieces were also made from MDF, which in hindsight I probably won't do again. There's the smaller cabinet and the internals of that smaller cabinet. So stay tuned and see how I put these together. Alright, so we're out here in the shop getting started. I've already milled a bunch of the material, so the way that started is a bunch of 5/4 poplar boards. Rough cut them all to length on the miter saw. I then would run one edge across the joiner to get one somewhat straight edge, doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough. And then I'd rip all these down to rough width on the bandsaw. From there, went through all the stages of milling. So right now all the lumber is I guess S3S, and it just needs to be ripped to width. So what I have here is all the milled lumber for the face frames, the shelf edging, the top edging. All that's laying here. It's all been drying for a couple of days after the milling. The lumber that you see here, this is all for the door parts. I have not milled this yet. This has just been rough cut to width, and that's just going to hang out until I'm ready to start on the doors. But the next step on the face frame parts is to rip all these to width and start making a face frame. So here we go. Alright, so ripping these face frame pieces down to width. I do get myself turned around a little bit about which one's a face frame part and which one isn't here, but most of my projects, I actually build the boxes first and then the face frames to fit. But doing some reading and online research, a lot of people actually build the face frame first to make sure that's going to fit the opening. So I decided to give that a shot here. Ripping a little fill strip there for the wall. And of course, after you rip them to width, cut them to length. The vertical styles are really easy, right? There's no tricky math involved there. It's just the overall height of your cabinet that you want. But for the horizontal rails, you have to account for the width of your stiles when you cut those to size. To put these face frames together, you can see I'm using loose tenons. Pocket screws would have worked just as well. Without the center divider on these cabinets, the center vertical piece, I felt like I would go for a little bit stronger joint with the domino, and then of course checking for square here before I really run down those clamps. I had a misaligned joint there on the face frame, so that kind of sucked. Had to plane one side down and then flip it over and plane all the other pieces down flush, so it took me some extra time. But now we're moving on to the carcass of the cabinets. First rough cut to width with the track saw, and then cut everything to final size here on the table saw.
triple checking my plan here. I need to make the dado that holds the bottom of the cabinet in place, which the adjustable legs will attach to. So it really determines the overall height of the cabinet. And you know, as I mentioned, it had to match the foundation of the basement. So making sure that that is in the right spot is critical.
So I've gotten all the pieces cut to size for the cabinet carcass, as well as cutting everything to length. And then this is just in a state of dry fit right now. I've got the face frame just sitting on top of here. But a couple things I do during this dry fit, right, is I'm going to, I have a rabbet along all the rear sections of the carcass for the 1/2 inch back to go into. So I've measured for that, wrote that down so I can cut that at a later time. As well, I was just triple checking that the face frame and my cabinet kind of, you know, the dimensions match. And so the width is spot on. I've got all that. That's perfect. 1/2 inch on one side, 1/4 inch on the other. The height, though, is one that I think I made a little mistake on. Yep. So this lower horizontal piece, I never remember if they're called stretchers, rail styles. Anyway, the lower horizontal piece here was supposed to be 2.5 inches tall. But I remember after joining it, I couldn't quite get 2.5 inches. I said, no big deal, 2 3/8 is fine. Well, come to find out 2 3/8 is not fine, because when I flush up the top of the face frame, the very bottom of the cabinet is proud of the face frame. So that kind of sucks. That means I have to shift everything up about a little over 1/8 of an inch or so to get it flush with the bottom. And so that means I'll have to cut off, you know, that 1/8 inch plus on top here. So not the end of the world, just that top section will be a little bit thinner than planned. Also, one other thing I'm going to do while this is dry fit is I'm going to make little spacers that go in here. Just dry fitting this and getting this put into place was kind of a pain in the butt. So what I'm going to do is make little spacers and pocket screw them into these two pieces and make almost like a little frame that goes up here. The reason these are made from 2 strips and not a solid piece of plywood, I didn't have enough, and I didn't feel like buying a whole nother sheet of plywood to make 2 of these sections, one for this cabinet and one for the other one. So this is more economical. Just it's going to get an actual top on it anyway, so it doesn't really matter how it looks. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to take this apart and dry fit the other one and do the same thing. So here we go.
After the dry fit measurements, it's time to actually glue the cabinet up. So here we go.
So the cabinets are out of the clamps. They're all looking good. One thing I didn't film before I glued up the cabinets is I actually did sand all the internal surfaces with the random orbital with 120 and then 180. Wet them down, hit them with 180 again, just to make sure those insides are all prepped for finish. After gluing them up, there is some glue squeeze out on, not everywhere, but on some of the internal seams. So I need to clean that up next. with a chisel, and then I'll hit it again with some sandpaper from the corners. After I get done cleaning up the glue and doing a light sanding again, I'm going to hit the insides with a couple coats of polyurethane. Just going to roll and brush it, just to make sure I want to do that before the face frame's on, because the face frame's going to just kind of be in the way. If it's on there, kind of blocks this front edge. So I'm going to do that first before I move on with more of the construction. Here we go.
Now I'm moving on to ripping the, I'll call them the side panel pieces of the cabinets, kind of making a frame looking thing on the side. I shouldn't have, as I mentioned in the intro, I probably wouldn't make these out of MDF again. The edge grain just never looks quite great. Even after sanding and painting, it still looks a little rough, so I probably should have used pine or poplar or something different here, but you know, you live and learn. Still end up pretty nice. Just attaching these pieces with, of course, with glue and then some 23 gauge pin nails.
So I have one of the face frames here sitting on top of my bench, and I have a router. And what I am doing is I'm actually making a small rabbet on the inside vertical parts of my face frame. And why that is that these hinges that I'm using, they're for face frame cabinets with 1/2-inch overlay doors. They've got these little teeth, I don't know if you can see them, kind of here and here, that are exactly a little over 3/4 inch spacing. And so what that helps present is when you put the screw in there, and over time it prevents the racking and that screw eventually loosening and pulling out. So I want to keep them intact. But my face frame is a little over 3/4. Where after I milled everything, I was probably closer to 7/8. So what I've done, like I mentioned, I put a rabbet on the inside here that just runs from probably 2 inches, 2 inches, and then all throughout the middle. So I can place these hinges through here, through this whole space, and the little teeth thing will work as intended. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I just got one done, tested the fit and everything, and now I'm gonna do the other 1, 2, 3 other rabbets. And then we're gonna take a break, eat some lunch, come out and glue up the face frame.
After lunch and a coffee, coming out to glue the face frame onto the cabinet. I'm lining up the face that's towards the fireplace, flush with that the MDF I just glued and pin nailed on. And then I'm making sure the very bottom edge of the face frame is flush with the top surface of the bottom of the cabinet, and doing some flush trimming here. You'll notice here towards the end I actually have to clamp on a little scrap piece of wood, so the router has something that the bearing can ride against and doesn't actually then ruin that corner of the cabinet. Now moving on to the edge for the adjustable shelves. Since they are maple, I thought a maple edge would only be appropriate. So I'm doing all the steps to get those sized, milled, cut the width before I glue them onto the front of the shelf.
Okay, so at this stage here we are pretty much done with the cabinet boxes. Some things I've done is flush trimmed just a little bit of overhanging plywood on my rabbet joints, as well as the face frame flush with the cabinet. What you can see here that I'm working on is working with the client to understand what type of design they want on the side of the cabinet that's going to be visible. So I was kind of playing around with different designs here. I cut this one a little short, but that's okay. Just figuring out some different options. Here's the base option. This is already glued and brad nailed into place, so that's kind of the simple frame look. And then we've got some other options with horizontal pieces and some X pattern. So working through that now. And cutting all these angles in the right length is a little tricky. Some trial and error there. A lot of work with the miter gauge on the table saw to get all these angles right and some geometry. So anyway, like I said, the cabinet boxes are in good shape. I also cut a large hole in the top here for cable management. There'll be a grommet that goes in the actual top of the cabinet to pass through. We got some adjustable shelves over here. Those are all sanded down, ready for finish, and they got notches in the corners that coincide with these holes in the top of the cabinet for cable management. Next up is right here in front of me, doors. This is the stock that's been milled on 2 sides, or 3 sides, I guess. It's S3S right now, so I just need to rip it all to width. And then I'm going to start cutting everything to length at the miter saw. And then start working on the laying out the joinery, which is going to be loose tenons to hold it together. And then after that I can work on the groove that will hold the panel, and then cut the panels down to size. So here we go. Next step, rip these to width and start making some doors.
Not even close. All right, here's a little math dancing for you. I'm accounting for the width of my door stiles when I cut the horizontal rails. Double checking all my measurements, and don't want to screw anything up, because screwing up the door width would really suck. Foreshadowing. Now moving on to laying out the tenon locations, or I should say the mortise locations on the doors. Instead of dry fitting and clamping up the doors and putting lines, I'm just marking everything from the edges of my stock here, so I know where to line up the domino. When I cut the mortises in the edge grain, I usually use it on the middle setting, so I get a little bit of allowance up and down. After I get these mortises cut, I cut the grooves in the door frame and the door stile and rails with a stopped groove on the vertical stiles, but these are the rails I can cut all the way through. And then I cut a rabbet on the panel that will fit in that groove on this piece of MDF. So this is a really good stopping point for video number 1. Please subscribe to my channel to catch video number 2. It'll be coming out shortly.